now by the Daily Wire's Matt Walsh from Nashville. How's the weather, Matt? I hear it's a little chilly down there.
So we got about 3 inches of snow, and it shut the whole city down. That's the way we do it here in the South. So it's been an adventure for sure.
Well, it's good to see you. Look, so much to talk about, as always, in your wheelhouse. But I want to talk about this extraordinary story about the Federal Aviation Administration actively recruiting workers who suffer severe intellectual disabilities, psychiatric problems, and other mental and physical conditions under a diversity and inclusion hiring initiative spelled out on the agency's website. On the face of it, this seems plain ridiculous. Your thoughts?
Yeah, on the face of it, it seems plain ridiculous. I think when you look deeper, it still seems plain ridiculous. Now, obviously, no one is claiming that at this point they're going to hire, someone who's blind or paralyzed to actually fly, a Delta aircraft 30,000 feet in the air. So we're not. Maybe we'll get to that point. We're not at that point yet. But the point is that they have decided. This goes back to, I believe, it was 2013, an Obama-era initiative by the FAA, that they wanted to diversify the airline industry, and they have a lot of several different groups that they wanted to increase their participation in the airline industry, and those with disabilities is one of those groups. Now, what you'll hear from people on the other side of this, the people that are fans of these kinds of diversification efforts, is that, well, yeah, they're doing this, but they're not lowering the standards at all in order to do it. That's the claim anyway. And it's true that whether it's the FAA or any other institution that is putting DEI into practice and trying to diversify, none of them will come out and say, of course, none of them are going to say that we're lowering the standards, but that obviously is what ends up happening. Because if you had the standards set a certain place, and then you ended up with like a certain number of, let's say, white pilots, and then you say, well, we don't want that many white pilots, so we want to get more of other types of people in there. Well, what do you have to do with the standards? You end up lowering them, and that's exactly what happens.
I mean, I saw that the new coach in the NFL has replaced Bill Belichick of the Patriots, and he's immediately come out and played the race card, and basically saying if you don't see colour, you don't understand racism, and so on. Other black coaches in the NFL have taken a very different view and said all they want to see is football and players. They don't care about what colour they are. And it struck me as sort of a bizarre stance to take, because the vast majority of players, for example, in the NFL are black. I think nearly 70%. What did you make of that when you heard it?
Well, I think if you are, if we're getting to the point where we can find anti-black racism in the NFL, well, then just the concept means nothing anymore. As you point out, I think it's like 70 to 80% of players in the NFL are black. The NFL, if you take all the different positions on the field and on the sidelines, it is, black people are vastly overrepresented when you compare them to the 13% of the overall population. So if we're looking for racism even there, then it's just the entire concept is totally meaningless. And in particular, this idea that black head coaches are being targeted for racism. Of course, I'm not the first person to point this out, but okay, if a lack of black NFL head coaches is a result of racism, then how do you explain a lack of, say, white defensive backs on the field?
Right.
There's basically none at this point. And are they being targeted for racism? So it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, 60% of Americans, I think, in the most recent poll I saw, are white, and yet they're not represented by 60% white players in the NFL or the NBA or most American sports. But nobody complains about that. No one says, well, hang on, that's racist. No one would think that way, the other way around. And I admire these black coaches in the NFL who've stood up and went, no, of course, it's ridiculous. It's irrelevant. All we care is how good the player is, or how good the coach is, or how good the executives are.
Yeah, and by the way, the reason why people don't complain the other way is that, of course, we know that diversify, diversity and inclusion, all these phrases, this is coded language, and what it really means is we have to make these things less white. But nobody wants to come out and say that. That's one of the reasons why you'll often hear them refer to not only diverse groups, but they'll talk about diverse people. We need a more diverse person in this role. Well, how could a person individually be diverse? Doesn't make any sense. Well, then you understand that what they're really saying is we want a non-white person. They just don't want to come out and say that. And I think another important point that you brought up is that, if we are obsessed with representation, if it is very important that every group be exactly represented in every industry that we look at, and I don't agree that that is important. I think that's an unworkable, untenable, unsustainable goal that makes no sense and it's totally arbitrary. But this is what representation would mean. Representation would mean that you have whatever your percentage is in the overall population, that's what you have in this industry. But then you find out that that's not good enough for the representation police, which is interesting.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Let's take a short break, Matt. I want to come back and talk about the Daily Wire's brilliant new comedy movie, Lady Ballers, which the title may give people a clue about what issue this is about, but of course it relates to this ongoing furore around trans athletes in women's sport. Welcome back to Uncensored. From New York, it was a lot colder than it looked in that live shot. Matt Walsh is still with me. Matt, Lady Ballers is the brilliant new movie from you guys at Daily Wire. Let's take a look at a little clip.
Let's cut to the chase. I know you're not a woman.
Hey, you don't know how he identifies.
If you can beat them.
What do you know about the U.S. Opens for the Global Games?
You want us to compete as women. $5,000 prizes.
My lover says you were a great coach back in the day.
Join.
This is the way the world is now. My 8-year-old daughter told me all about it. So a guy can become a girl with no physical changes at all.
Oh, that's called gender fluid.
I mean, it's a brilliant idea. First of all, why did you make it?
Well, I can't take credit for making the movie or writing it or anything like that. I play a relatively small role in the film, and I think my entire role is really just me being trolled by the director of the film, who's also CEO of the company, Jeremy Boring, where he decided to write a role for me where I am the exact opposite of who I am in real life, just to make me as uncomfortable as possible. So I'm playing this this kind of left-wing hippie character who's also a big hugger. I'm big into hugging people in the movie. But I think the reason why the movie exists is pretty simple. Number one, it's a really funny idea, and it's also it's the kind of movie that needs to exist. Like this whole concept of men competing against women in women's sports is absurd. It's ridiculous. It's laughable, and if this kind of thing was happening 25 years ago, there would probably be a comedy like this made about it. But these days,
yes.
Well, they don't really make comedies anymore at all, but they certainly aren't going to make a comedy making fun of this. So we did.
And the truth is that it really takes the whole argument on the pro-trans athlete side to its logical conclusion. I've always, when I've interviewed politicians who don't want to speak common sense about this, I say, well, okay, so if you have limitless self-identity and anyone can say I'm now female, what happens if Usain Bolt or Floyd Mayweather decide they want to be a woman? Would you be happier than competing against biological females in women's sport? And they always have to say yes. And it's always completely preposterous. Floyd Mayweather would kill women in a ring, and Usain Bolt would win the 100 metres women's Olympic final by about 99 metres. I mean, it's an absurdity, which this film brilliantly lampoons, but is actually true.
It is true, which is why you don't have to work that hard to make fun of it, and you don't even have to exaggerate that much. This is one of the things that actually, maybe it makes satire difficult these days, is that the reality itself is so ridiculous that it's usually in satire you're taking something, you're taking the logic to an extreme extent to show how ridiculous it is. But in this case, all you're doing is this is what's actually happening in real life. And I think that what you said there is key, though. You said that they have to. You were talking to someone who supports men and women's sports. They have to go along with it. They have to agree to whatever absurd scenario you throw at them, and they really do. They have to. But I don't think they actually believe it. I think that the number of people who really deep down believe that it's fair and right for biological males to compete against females in sports. I mean, the number of people is vanishingly small. But on the left, they've basically boxed themselves into a corner, and so they have to defend this, and we should make them defend it.
Whilst simultaneously trying to pretend that they are pro-women's rights. I mean, that's the absurdity, because, of course, it's women's rights to fairness and equality that are being dismantled at this altar of virtue signalling nonsense.
And there are also the people that have claimed in the past to care so much about maintaining women's sports. I mean, that's what Title IX was supposed to be about. You know, people often accuse me on the left. They'll say, well, you don't even care about women's sports that much. You're just pretending. I never said that. I don't wake up in the morning worrying about women's sports. I don't watch women's sports. So in that sense, yeah, I don't care about it in that sense. But I do care about just what's right. I care about what's logical, what makes sense. I care about the kids that are involved in these sports and protecting them. So yeah, but if you do pretend that this is something that's very important to you, then the question is why aren't you there taking up?
Right.
This?
I mean, I care because I have a 12-year-old daughter who's quite sporty, and I don't want her to, if she was to suddenly be very successful at some sport, in women's sport, I don't want to have her have a dream killed or a place in a team, or, you know, even you see it at the Olympic level. You see women being deprived of an Olympic place, a coveted, glorious Olympic place by a biological male. That's just not right. It's not fair. It's not right. It's not equal. It's none of those things.
And I also would not want my daughter, I wouldn't want her athletic opportunities taken from her if she decided to get into sports. I don't want her to be in a position where she has to go along with something that is a total farce. Like that, it's wrong to put anybody, especially kids, no matter what the context is, to put them in a position where they have to, where they feel pressured to go along with something like that. And especially when the pressure is coming from adults. I mean, it's one thing when you deal with peer pressure as a kid from other kids, but in this case, it's the adults that are using their authority and their power to usher you along in this direction. I think it's just
utterly
totally
ridiculous. Now, I want to put two pictures up on the screen for our audience. These are both Calvin Klein underwear commercials. One stars a female model, and the other one stars the Bears actor Jeremy Allen White. And what is comical about this is that they both reveal a lot of flesh. In fact, the man reveals more flesh than the woman. The female one has been censored by the Advertising Standards Authority because it's overtly sexual, but the other one is apparently absolutely fine. I've seen this hypocrisy and double standard on these kind of things for decades, Matt. Right? It's absurd, isn't it?
It is totally absurd. For that one, it's hard for me to even understand. I mean, usually when you have an absurdity like this, you can understand what logic they're going for, even if it doesn't really make sense ultimately. But in that case, I'm not even sure exactly what would their argument be.
Apparently, the argument was that the ad involving FKA twigged the model's physical features rather than the clothing presented as a stereotypical sexual object. He has less clothes on than she does.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. But when you're talking about things like decency and modesty, and that's an important conversation to have. But I think in our culture, we don't have a very coherent notion of what that even is or how to apply it, and that's how you end up with confused situations.
Ridiculous.
Like
Matt, we've run out of time. It's always great to catch up with you. I hope it warms up down there, and I hope to catch up with you again soon. Thank you very much.